Stop scrolling for a second, because this is going to be the craziest shit you've heard today. How many of y'all are aware that a climate activist lit himself on fire and died outside of the Supreme Court building this past Earth Day? After this happened, people found his Facebook profile and discovered that he was a devout Buddhist who was disturbed about climate change and that he had been planning this for at least a year. Someone who knew him personally tweeted and said, "This act is not suicide. This is a deeply fearless act of compassion to bring attention to climate crisis." Now, the crazy thing is, number one, you probably haven't even heard of this story yet. And number two, if you did look it up on any major media news outlet, they don't even mention the fact that he was a climate activist or give any reason why he did this at all. I'm sure that by now y'all have heard of the scientist rebellion that recently happened, where all over the world scientists were protesting fossil fuels and its investors. Several of them were arrested, and they were pretty much saying, guys, we need to act now, nobody's listening to us. And since mainstream media is neglecting to cover this story accurately, it's our job to make sure that this story is told and that this man didn't make such a brave sacrifice in complete vain.
So this TikToker by the name of Ladala Bean points out something that should be incredibly alarming. Now, this news story about this man that set himself on fire in front of the Supreme Court as a protest about climate change should be a huge news story. But the media, generally speaking, seems to not be interested in that. In fact, if you look at a lot of the major platforms, it seems that coverage of climate change tends to be fairly limited. Basically, the only times that they'll cover climate change is when it comes up relative to the weather. But outside of major climate events, there's not regular reporting about things like the scientific reports that say that climate change is going a lot faster than we anticipated, about the fact that scientists are speaking out about us potentially having passed significant points of no return, about the constant crises that are faced in other parts of the world because of climate change. But why aren't these media companies focusing on that? And why do so many online platforms seem to deprioritize in their algorithms content about climate change? Well, some reporting from The Nation actually makes an interesting argument that it is actually because a lot of these media companies are working with oil companies. Have you ever noticed how you'll see ads for oil companies like all the time? Why? Why are there ads for oil companies? Has an advertisement influenced which gas station you go to? I mean, think about it. It's really one of those industries where there's no need for advertising. But, as Noam Chomsky pointed out literally decades ago, the purpose of advertising like that is not about actually advertising to consumers. It is all about giving as much money as possible to media outlets so that they will give you favorable coverage in order to keep that ad revenue. It doesn't even have to come with statements of, hey, say nice things about me or we'll take this money away, because that is implied in the money they're spending in the ad revenue. You're obviously not going to advertise in outlets that are constantly talking about how, your whole entire industry is destroying the planet. And that is leading to some serious problems when it comes to what we are dealing with in terms of climate change. Because the reality is, things are not getting better. Joe Biden is not taking this seriously. Joe Biden and the Democrats at this point have basically given up any serious type of climate fight. In fact, they keep bragging about how much oil they continue to pump. And I think we all know where Republicans stand when it comes to climate change. So the reality is there's no allowable political discourse when it comes to climate change. Democrats will say they care about it, they say they're taking it seriously, but those serious efforts have yet to materialize. Even the Green New Deal doesn't go anywhere near enough to actually deal with the problem at hand. So when a story like this happens, and the media mentions the fact that somebody did this in front of the Supreme Court, but doesn't focus on the reality that it was about climate change, when tons of police officers respond to a handful of scientists in Los Angeles who are protesting climate change, and the media fails to report on that, at a certain point we have to recognize that the capitalists that are dictating policy at the federal level, that the capitalists that own the media are also the same capitalists that are invested in oil. Because here's the big secret about capitalism. These industries love each other because, and think about it for a second, if you're a really, really rich person, are you going to invest all of your money into one industry? Of course you're not. They're all invested into each other's industries. All of their money is tied together in the same stock market. So even if the advertising revenue wasn't coming from these big oil companies, if you're a giant corporation, you want the stocks to go up. And for the stocks to go up, we have to keep selling oil. And here's where it gets even worse. The reality is, there's plenty of ways for capitalists to profit off of scarcity. There's plenty of ways for capitalists to profit off of environmental destruction. I mean, think about it. If you're a real estate developer and an entire town burns down, then you see that as an opportunity to build a new town, maybe this time with even higher rents. And if you're a big bank and you see that, then you're like, heck yeah, we're going to get a bunch of loans to finance those mortgages, and those mortgages are going to be really expensive because this is a very disastrous area to live in. You see, that's the reality, is that capitalists don't care about climate change. Every moment of human suffering that is caused by climate change, capitalists see as an opportunity to make a profit.